They kept targeting me repeatedly for legally hunting deer and other game with every required permit, just because my property bordered a vast forest area they believed they controlled. They chose the wrong person. Instead of merely contesting the fines, I purchased the whole forest, spanning thousands of acres. Needless to say, the residents of the Homeowners Association are no longer enjoying their nature walks there. It all began rather quietly, as these stories often do. I bought my home specifically because it was one of the few in the community that directly backed onto the woods, a vast stretch of privately owned forest covering miles. For someone like me who finds peace and purpose in the outdoors, managing wildlife responsibly through hunting and living away from manicured lawns and suburban noise, it was ideal. I spent years exploring those woods, learning the trails, and observing animal behavior. I am very careful with regulations, state licenses, specific deer season tags, proper firearm safety, and respecting property boundaries. I even had them surveyed when I purchased the land. Everything was done by the book. All hunting took place deep inside the forest, far from any homes, definitely beyond the weak limits of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association's authority. The forest was not theirs, nor was it common land. It belonged to an old timber family trust located out of state. My first encounters with neighbors were pleasant enough. Most people kept to themselves, exchanging only occasional polite nods. The homeowner association appeared mostly inactive, focused on minor issues like lawn height and hiding trash bins, the typical trivial matters. Then Brenda was elected president of the HOA. Brenda, a woman whose main experience seemed to be complaining at planning board meetings and coordinating the yearly pet parade, suddenly found a new sense of purpose. She wielded the limited authority of the HOA like a medieval ruler. Her way of speaking was sharp and condescending, delivered with an unshakable confidence that struck me from the very first community meeting I attended. She acted as if the HOA rules were sacred texts, and she was the only legitimate interpreter. The trouble began on a cool Saturday morning during deer season. I had successfully hunted deep in the forest, ethically taking down a respectable buck more than a mile from my property, quite far from the housing development. After field dressing the animal where it fell, I transported it properly using a game cart and arrived at my garage by midday, planning to process the meat later. As I was unloading my equipment, my rifle in its case, my backpack, and the carefully wrapped meat in coolers, Brenda's golf cart suddenly skidded to a stop at the end of my driveway. She jumped out with surprising energy for someone usually so inactive, clutching a clipboard as if it was a weapon. "Pardon me," she said sharply, her voice filled with disapproval. "What is all this about?" I hesitated, admittedly caught off guard by her confrontational manner. "Good morning, Brenda. I just returned from a hunt," I replied, motioning vaguely toward the forest. "I managed to fill my tag." Her gaze tightened, scrutinizing my equipment, especially the coolers. "Hunting? You know that is not allowed in Whispering Pines." I remained calm. "Brenda, I was not hunting in Whispering Pines. I was way back in the woods on the lumber company's property where it is completely legal with the state permits I have right here." I tapped my jacket pocket where my license was kept. My activity did not take place anywhere near the HOA's land. She snorted, consulting her clipboard as if it held some sacred truth. "The rules clearly say that anything disturbing the peace or endangering the community is forbidden, including firing guns or bringing animal carcasses through the neighborhood. It's simply unacceptable." I felt a surge of irritation. "Brenda, the shot was fired miles away, causing no threat, and processing game is normal for legal hunting. It's being done discreetly and hygienically in my own garage on my own property. To my knowledge, it does not break any specific rule." She waved her hand dismissively. "The sight of it upsets residents. We have children here." Consider this your first formal warning. We will be keeping an eye on this situation." Before I could say anything more, Brenda climbed back into her golf cart and sped off, leaving me standing there with my legally obtained deer and a growing feeling of disbelief. This was not about safety rules or regulations, it felt personal. Brenda clearly disliked hunting and planned to use the HOA's weak authority to stop me. That initial meeting set the tone for what would become a prolonged, absurd, and eventually costly dispute, mostly for them, as it turned out. At that moment I just felt tired, already expecting the bureaucratic hassle Brenda was surely plotting in her control room, probably drafting vague new rules against offensive displays of outdoor activities as we spoke. The tranquility I sought in the forest was about to be disturbed by suburban spite. Brenda had no idea she was challenging someone who valued that peace and the rights protecting it far more than she could ever understand. My bond with that woodland, the place she was trying to control from a distance, went beyond mere leisure. It was a core reason why I chose to live there. I was not going to allow some power-hungry HOA president to dictate my lawful actions miles away from her perfectly maintained lawn. Brenda's first warning was not just an empty threat. It marked the beginning of a campaign of HOA-approved harassment. True to her word, the scrutiny had begun. Almost right away, I started to notice Brenda driving her golf cart slowly past my house more frequently, especially on weekend mornings or evenings when I might be going out or coming back from the woods, whether I was hunting or just hiking. Occasionally, one of her board associates, usually a retiree named Gary, who seemed to have too much free time, would be sitting down the street pretending to read a newspaper. It felt invasive and honestly unsettling. I kept up with my hunting, making sure to be even more cautious, parking my truck further inside the garage before unloading, trying to keep any signs hidden from the street. But Brenda did not require solid proof. Her assumptions and personal disapproval were enough. A week after our confrontation in the driveway, the first official letter came by certified mail, bearing the Whispering Pines HOA logo embossed at the top. It formally accused me of breaking Bylaw 7.14, accusing me of activities that harmed the visual harmony and peaceful enjoyment of the neighborhood. The evidence mentioned included observed hunting gear and reports of behavior that did not fit community standards. The letter imposed a $100 fine and demanded that I stop all hunting activities immediately, no matter the location. I was furious, not only about the fine, but about the vague accusations and the suggestion that my fully legal pastime on my own property was somehow harmful. I promptly took out my copy of the HOA CCRs and bylaws to review them. I carefully reviewed Bylaw 7.14 along with the related sections. There was absolutely no statement explicitly forbidding hunting off the HOA property. The wording was open to interpretation and seemed designed as a broad catch-all for issues the board wanted to control. There were rules about firing guns within the neighborhood, which I had never done, rules about noise disturbances that did not apply, and rules concerning the appearance of the property. Nothing mentioned legal hunting miles away on someone else's land. I composed a calm and professional reply. I emphasized that my hunting took place well outside the neighborhood, completely legal on land that was neither owned nor governed by the HOA. I attached copies of my state hunting license, my deer tags, a map illustrating the great distance between the development and my usual hunting sites, and pointed out the exact part of the CCNRs that made clear the HOA's authority stopped at our property boundaries. I clearly stated I had not broken Bylaw 7.14, that having hunting gear visible on my own property did not constitute a violation, and that I would neither pay the fine nor stop my lawful activities. I sent this by certified mail to ensure I had proof of delivery. Brenda's reply came quickly and was dismissive. Another letter arrived, this time declaring that the board had reviewed my appeal and found it lacking any merit. The original fine was upheld. Additionally, a new fine of $250 was imposed for improper garbage disposal, vaguely connected to the situation. Biological material, presumably connected to game processing. Despite providing no proof, they were essentially targeting me based on Brenda's assumptions about what I did in my own garage after returning from the woods. It became increasingly obvious that logic and facts held no value for them. This was an exercise of authority driven by Brenda's personal motives. I spoke with a neighbor, Mark, who lived a few houses away. He was usually quiet, but rolled his eyes when I brought up Brenda. He admitted she had been aggressive lately. Last month she tried to report me because my garden hose was not perfectly coiled. He said she acts like she owns the place ever since her husband left. Mark was not a hunter, but agreed the HOA went way beyond its authority if they attempted to regulate lawful activities off their property. He warned that Brenda had the backing of Gary and another board member, which usually meant she got what she wanted. This small gesture of neighborly sympathy strengthened my determination. I realized I was not the only one who found this situation ridiculous. I also briefly consulted with a friend who works in real estate law. Although he did not specialize in HOA cases, he confirmed my interpretation of the community covenants. Unless there was clear wording banning hunting off the property or bringing legally taken game onto it, the HOA's stance was very weak. He recommended documenting absolutely everything, saving all letters with postmarks, and taking time-stamped photographs. My equipment was being stored properly, and I was considering obtaining a statement from the game warden to verify the legality of my hunting locations and methods. He advised me that homeowners' associations can often be extremely challenging, sometimes attempting to win by exhausting the homeowners with paperwork and threats of liens. The threats began shortly after. The following letter completely disregarded my responses and simply added up the fines, including late charges, while reminding me of the HOA's right to place a lien on my property if I did not pay the outstanding amount quickly. This marked a major escalation. A lien could damage my credit, mortgage, and even my ability to sell the house someday. It was the HOA's ultimate weapon against non-compliance. They were no longer just penalizing me. They were actively jeopardizing my financial stability and home ownership over something I was fully entitled to do far away from their petty domain. The frustration was overwhelming, but it quickly turned into firm resolve. They thought they could intimidate me into giving up. They underestimated my determination and deep belief in property rights, both mine and those of the forest owner. They were implicitly trying to take control. Brenda's little battle was about to push me in a way she could not foresee. This fight was no longer solely about hunting. It had become a stand against unreasonable intrusion. And I began. I kept wondering what the final boundary I could establish would be. The penalties continued to accumulate, along with increasingly harsh letters warning about liens and legal proceedings. Every certified letter I received felt like the pressure tightening even more. My efforts to have a reasonable conversation were met with generic, dismissive replies from the HOA board, clearly directed by Brenda. It was like trying to argue with a wall that believed it ruled the entire county. Paying the fines seemed wrong because it would validate their absurd overreach. Ignoring them felt dangerous given the threat of a lien. I needed a new strategy, something that tackled the core issue and not just the consequences. The core problem, as I saw it, was the unclear boundary between my property, the HOA's jurisdiction, and the expansive forest beyond. Brenda and her associates acted as if their power somehow extended into those woods, or at least gave them the right to punish me for what I did there. I thought, what if that boundary became perfectly clear? What if the ownership of that forest belonged to someone they could not intimidate? My first concrete action was hiring a professional land surveyor. Not just any surveyor, but a highly respected company known for its precise work, especially in resolving boundary conflicts. I wanted a solid, updated survey of my property lines, showing exactly where the HOA land ended and the forest began. Although it was an expensive step, it was necessary. It cost a couple of $1,000s, but I saw it as an investment in preparation for the battle ahead. The surveyors stayed out there for a few days with their advanced equipment. Naturally, their presence attracted attention. Brenda herself arrived on the second day in her golf cart, insisting on knowing what was happening. I was at home and intercepted her. I told her they were verifying my property lines, keeping my tone calm as I explained that they were making sure all my fences and landscaping were properly placed. She eyed the surveyor suspiciously. "It seemed like an unnecessary cost," she said quietly, "unless I was planning something." I answered smoothly that I was just being a responsible homeowner, not fishing for trouble. Unlike some people who try to control matters far beyond their authority, Brenda's expression hardened. But the surveyors were working strictly within my property limits, and she had no power to stop them. Eventually, she drove away in frustration. The survey results confirmed my original assumption and matched the boundaries on my deed perfectly. My property ended neatly where the woods began. The forest area was completely separate. While the surveyors were at work, I casually asked them about the large neighboring parcel, the forest itself. They were familiar with the land. It was one of the largest remaining privately owned timberlands in the area. They confirmed it belonged to the Black Creek Timber Trust, managed by an elderly caretaker. An executive living several states away mentioned in passing that there had been inquiries over the years, mostly from developers aiming to divide the land. However, the trust had consistently resisted selling, particularly in pieces. This sparked a thought. If the trust was open to selling, perhaps it would prefer a buyer with a conservation mindset, someone who valued the land in its natural state. This idea led me deep into online research. I spent hours investigating county property records, tax documents, and corporate papers related to the Black Creek Timber Trust. I discovered the trust had been founded many decades ago. The main beneficiaries were elderly or had already passed away, and the current executive, a man named Arthur Jenkins, was quite advanced in age himself. Managing such a vast amount of timberland from afar was likely a heavy administrative load he might want to relieve. The tax records revealed that annual property taxes were quite high. It appeared pressure could be building to sell the asset. I also looked for any signs of past offers or inquiries. Curiously, I found notes from a county planning meeting held about 5 or 6 years earlier where the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association, led by a previous president, had asked about buying a 50-foot buffer area of the forest directly behind the neighborhood. The meeting minutes indicated their informal proposal was... The offer was ridiculously low and politely turned down by the trust's representatives at the time, who explained they did not want to sell off small segments. Had Brenda brought this idea back to life? Could her harassment of me have been partly driven by a desire to pressure the trust somehow, or maybe make the area appear troublesome, lowering its value for a future HOA attempt to buy? It sounded a bit conspiratorial, but knowing Brenda's craving for control, it was not entirely impossible. She might view creating a buffer zone as her ultimate legacy project. My investigation felt like assembling a puzzle. The HOA's overreach, Brenda's character, the existence of this vast, potentially purchasable forest tract, the trust's seeming unwillingness to engage with developers or accept low offers. A bold, almost absurd idea began to form. What if I bought the entire forest? It seemed crazy at first. We were talking about thousands of acres, a multi-million-dollar endeavor. Yet, the more I considered it, the less unreasonable it appeared. It wouldn't be easy by any means, but perhaps feasible. It would be the perfect solution. It would secure my access and right to hunt. It would put an absolute legal stop to the HOA's harassment related to my activities there. And the delicious irony of it all, it would give me control over the very land Brenda appeared to desire. The fines, the threats, the petty surveillance suddenly seemed like trivial inconveniences. Compared to the promise of this bold counteraction, my records continued. I carefully filed the survey results, but my attention shifted from defensive tactics to forward-looking strategic planning. The HOA believed they were cornering me. They had no clue they were actually steering me toward owning the entire property. The notion of purchasing the Black Creek Timber Trust land transformed from a crazy idea into a serious, all-consuming mission. This was nothing like buying a car or even a home. It was a complicated, high-risk venture demanding large amounts of money and meticulous negotiation. The initial challenge was financial. Thousands of acres, even undeveloped timberland, represented a value far beyond what my current cash allowed. I spent many weeks reviewing my finances, savings, investments, and retirement funds. I owned a couple of small assets that I could possibly sell. Still, the amount fell far short of what I needed. I investigated loan possibilities and quietly talked to a commercial loan officer at my bank who specialized in substantial land purchases. It was intimidating. Banks tend to be cautious about lending large sums for land that does not generate income unless there is a clear plan for timber harvesting or development, neither of which was my main objective. My aim was preservation, personal enjoyment, and frankly, a statement against the HOA. Then I remembered my old college roommate, Dave. Dave had succeeded in the tech industry and, even more importantly, he was a conservationist and outdoorsman, someone who shared my annoyance with suburban expansion and excessive bureaucracy. We had stayed in contact, occasionally going on hunting or fishing adventures together. I carefully brought up the topic during a weekend camping trip, far away from curious listeners. I explained the entire situation, the HOA trouble, the forest land, the old trust, and the possible chance. Unexpectedly, Dave did not find it amusing. He paid close attention, nodding as I spoke. "So, you want to buy a forest to get back at your HOA, Karen?" he said with a smile spreading across his face. "Partly, I admit," I answered, "but also to protect it, to prevent it from turning into another housing development, and to secure our access for hunting and hiking forever." The conservation aspect appealed to him just as much as the idea of revenge. He shared that he had been seeking a meaningful, long-term investment that matched his environmental principles. We spent the remainder of the weekend brainstorming ideas. We could create an LLC, combine our resources, and possibly include one or two other trustworthy, like-minded investors if necessary. Dave had capital access I lacked, while I contributed local knowledge, determination, and had already completed the initial groundwork. We agreed to move forward with forming a partnership focused on purchasing the Black Creek property. This partnership provided the necessary strength to proceed. We engaged a lawyer who specialized in major real estate deals and conservation easements. Our lawyer prepared the initial confidential documents. I reached out to Arthur Jenkins, the executive of the Black Creek Timber Trust. We did not bring up the HOA issue. Our approach was solely as a private investment group aiming to acquire and protect the entire timberland parcel. Jenkins, as I had guessed, was quite old and growing more tired of managing the extensive property. Our timing was lucky. He confirmed the trust was considering selling options. He appeared genuinely happy that our interest was in preservation instead of immediate logging or subdivision. He mentioned that he had turned away many predatory developer offers over the years and seemed cautious about low offers. This worked to our advantage because we were not looking to quickly resell. We planned to be long-term caretakers. The negotiation was intense and drawn out, lasting several months. There were detailed surveys, environmental studies, and timber appraisals required for valuation, even though immediate harvesting was not intended. Plus, a lot of legal negotiations. Dave and I flew out to meet Jenkins in person, building a connection and reassuring him about our goals. He was sharp, knowledgeable, and tough in negotiations. Still, in the end, he appeared to prefer selling to us rather than other prospective buyers. Throughout this entire process, I had to keep everything absolutely confidential within the community. The HOA fines kept adding up. The threatening letters continued to arrive. I paid them all. One or two of the smaller initial fines were paid under protest, purely as a tactical decision meant to delay the lien process while the land purchase was still pending. It bothered me deeply to send them money, but my attorney advised that this might prevent them from rushing into immediate legal action before we were fully prepared. Brenda stayed completely unaware of the brewing storm. She took my partial payment as a sign that I was finally giving in to the pressure. On one occasion, she even made a smug remark while I was collecting my mail, saying, "Glad to see you're starting to follow the rules, Mr. Miller. It is for the benefit of the community." I just gave her a tight smile without a word. Inside, I imagined her expression when she discovered that I owned the thousands of acres right behind her beloved community. There was one close call. A junior lawyer representing the trust needed some detailed county zoning information and mistakenly contacted the Whispering Pines HOA office, confusing them with a local government agency. Fortunately, the usual office administrator responded with, "Not Brenda," and simply redirected the lawyer to the appropriate county department. If Brenda had answered that call, she might have connected the dots. But fate, it appeared, was working in my favor. After many months of negotiation, thorough due diligence, and stressful financial arrangements that pushed Dave and me to our limits, the deal was finally sealed. The contracts were signed, and the funds were transferred. The LLC that Dave and I established was now the official owner of the entire Black Creek Timber Trust estate. Thousands of acres of woodland stretching along the entire rear side of the Whispering Pines development were under our control. The largest possible warning sign, both figuratively and literally, was about to be installed. The initial stage of Operation Forest Fortress had been completed. The second stage, the unveiling, was ready to start. The ink on the final sale papers was barely dry when I launched Phase 2, which was Operation Boundary Enforcement. The enormity of owning such extensive land was just starting to sink in. A mix of excitement and the heavy burden of responsibility filled me, but my immediate priority was clear. I had to secure the perimeter and send a long-overdue message to the Whispering Pines HOA and its meddlesome president, Brenda. The first step was the signs. Not ordinary signs, but professionally produced, large, and very visible ones that left zero chance for misunderstanding. I ordered about 50 signs made from sturdy metal featuring sharp white letters on a dark background. They read, "Private property, posted, no trespassing, hunting, hiking, camping, ATV riding, and all other access strictly forbidden. Violators will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Property owned by Iron Creek Holdings, LLC." Importantly, at the bottom of several main signs placed near the primary informal access points from the HOA development, I included a very specific statement. Access is strictly prohibited for all residents, visitors, and members of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. I wanted there to be no confusion at all. The previous owner might have tolerated decades of lenient access, causing neighbors to believe they had the right to enter. That belief needed to be completely broken. Over the following weekend, with Dave and a couple of strong friends sworn to secrecy, we set out on a deliberate mission to install signs. Using GPS, we traced the property boundary next to the development, placing signs about every 100 yards to ensure they were highly visible. We paid special attention to the well-used paths coming from backyards into the forest, those trails where dogs were walked, children played, and residents enjoying the woods took casual strolls. Ironically, these were the very people whose HOA board had decided that my presence deeper within those woods was unacceptable. We hammered heavy metal posts firmly into the soil and securely attached the signs. The work brought a sense of satisfaction. Each sound of the post driver felt like a small triumph. The initial response from neighbors briefly enjoying their yards was one of puzzlement. Some waved, others exchanged questioning glances. We simply smiled, waved back, and kept working, no explanations offered yet. The signs would send the message on their own in due time. The real drama began Monday morning. I made sure to work from home, positioned where I could clearly see one of the main former access trails around. At 9 o'clock in the morning, Brenda appeared, striding purposefully down the path with a clipboard in her hand, clearly on one of her neighborhood patrols. She came to a sudden halt when she noticed the brand-new shining sign completely blocking the entrance to the trail. Her expression shifted dramatically through confusion, narrowed disbelief, and then intense frustration. She actually reached out and tapped the sign as if it were some kind of trick. Then she whirled around, her eyes searching, and saw me standing near my back porch, calmly drinking coffee. Without hesitation, she crossed the lawns between us, probably breaking several rules herself, and stood at the very edge of my property, just where the new boundary officially begins. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, pointing an unsteady finger at the sign. "Who put this up? This is community access land. You cannot just block it." I took a slow sip of coffee. "Good morning, Brenda. Actually, this is no longer community access land. It hasn't been since last Friday afternoon." For a brief moment, her mouth moved silently. "What are you talking about? The Timber Trust owns that land. We've always used these trails," I corrected her calmly, keeping my voice steady. "The Timber Trust sold that land. It is now owned by a private investment group." I paused for effect. "An investment group where I am the managing partner." I let the words hang in the air. Brenda's face. She went through a cycle of disbelief, confusion, and finally dawning terror as the meaning struck her. "You purchased the entire forest." The words barely escaped her lips as a choked whisper. "That is correct, Brenda. All several thousand acres belong to us now. The very land you were so worried about me using legally. It is in our possession," I clarified, indicating the woods expansively. "As the new owners, we have chosen to assert our property rights and limit access, particularly," I added, locking eyes with her, "for the residents of Whispering Pines. Due to the clear lack of respect for property lines and lawful activities demonstrated by its leadership," she stammered, flushing. "You cannot do this. There must be easements. We have rights." "No, Brenda, you do not," I responded firmly. "We conducted thorough title investigations. There are absolutely no recorded easements allowing the HOA or its residents to cross this land. Any earlier access was purely permission granted by the previous owners, and that permission is now withdrawn. The signs posted are legally enforceable. Trespassers will face prosecution." From my pocket, I presented a copy of the newly filed deed. The official stamps, legal descriptions, and the name of our LLC were undeniable. She grabbed it, scanning it frantically as her face lost color. "This is beyond outrageous. You did this solely to spite us." "My reasons are my own, Brenda," I said calmly. "But let's just say the HOA's endless harassment over my completely lawful off-property activities sparked a great deal of inspiration. You wanted to have control over what occurred near those woods? Congratulations, you have forced someone to purchase the woods themselves. Now, if you will, please respect the property boundary. At the moment, you are trespassing on the HOA's common area, but if you go any further, I gestured toward the sign she had been confronting, you will be trespassing on my property. She looked at me, utterly speechless for perhaps the first time. Ever. Then, with a strangled sound of rage and resignation, she turned and almost ran back to her golf cart, the deed still clutched tightly in her hand. The rumor mill at Whispering Pines must have erupted that day. All afternoon, I noticed small groups of neighbors gathering near the signs, pointing, whispering, and glancing toward my home. The forest they had long taken for granted, their usual backyard retreat, was suddenly, irreversibly off-limits. The HOA's campaign against me had spectacularly backfired. They were not only failing to stop my hunting, but had directly caused the entire community to lose all access to the woods. The irony was so thick it felt tangible, and this was only the beginning. Enforcement would be the next crucial step. The placement of the signs and the encounter with Brenda were merely the opening scenes. The real challenge was making this new reality stick in Whispering Pines. For years, residents had unrestricted access to those woods, and habits, especially ones tied to a sense of entitlement, are difficult to change. Brenda and I understood that simply putting up signs would not solve the problem. We needed steady legal action to enforce the rules. Initially, we invested in technology. We carefully placed a network of high-resolution, motion-activated trail cameras around the main former entry points, as well as other areas where people might try to sneak in. These were not ordinary security cameras. Designed for monitoring wildlife, they were weatherproof, able to capture sharp images both day and night, and capable of sending immediate alerts to our phones. We also took formal steps. Our attorney sent a registered letter to the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association Board, officially informing them about the ownership change. The letter emphasized the no trespassing rule, including a specific clause about HOA residents, and warned that any breaches would be met with legal action. Copies of the deed and survey map were attached, leaving no room for ignorance among the board or their represented residents. As expected, in the first few days, several people tried to ignore the new signs. Dog walkers acted as if they hadn't noticed them, teenagers searched for shortcuts, and a few elderly residents appeared convinced that their long-established habits gave them some kind of grandfathered privilege. Our cameras recorded every incident, starting with those involving adults. Testing limits clearly, I decided on a straightforward but firm approach. I approached a couple walking their labradoodle approximately 50 yards beyond a clearly visible sign. "Excuse me, folks," I called as I moved toward them, but remained on my property side. "It seems you did not notice the sign back there. This is private property now, and trespassing is prohibited." They appeared embarrassed. "Oh, we have been walking here for many years," the woman objected. "I understand," I answered calmly. "However, the property has new owners, and the access rules have changed. The previous owner allowed entry. We do not. I must ask you to return to the HOA common area." They grumbled but followed my request, leading their dog back onto the well-kept grass. The meeting with Gary, Brenda's strong supporter on the board, was less agreeable. A camera alert showed him intentionally stepping over a fallen log near a sign and continuing down a trail. I went out to confront him. "Gary," I said sharply, "turn around. You know you are trespassing." He paused, trying to appear confident. "This is absurd," he said. "Brenda told us you were doing this just to cause trouble. We will fight this." I remained calm and asked, "Fight what, Gary? My right as a property owner to decide who enters my land while you are standing right on it? breaking the law you, as an HOA board member, are supposed to enforce in your own community. I held up my phone to show him the clear footage from the trail camera. I mentioned that this was being recorded and that I had evidence of him purposely ignoring the posted sign. I warned him to turn around immediately, or I would contact the sheriff's department to report a trespasser. His bravado quickly faded as he realized he was caught in the act. Grumbling threats about lawyers and HOA consequences, he retreated the way he had come. The issue with unsupervised children and teenagers was more complicated. We wanted to avoid involving law enforcement with minors whenever possible. For the incidents caught on camera, we sent the footage along with a warning letter to the HOA board through our attorney. We demanded that they notify the parents and ensure such behavior would not continue, reminding them of the legal risks if someone were to be harmed while trespassing. This strategy appeared effective. After the first few warnings were sent out, the number of kids wandering into the woods decreased significantly. The real challenge arrived about 2 weeks later. Brenda, perhaps thinking enough time had passed or believing I would hesitate to escalate matters, organized a protest walk. She gathered around 5 or 6 supportive residents and deliberately walked past one of the prominent signs onto a clearly marked trail, supposedly to check the illegal community access blockage. The trail camera immediately sent me an alert. This time I did not hesitate and called the non-emergency line for the county sheriff to report the incident. There was an ongoing trespassing incident involving several individuals who had disregarded both posted signs and verbal warnings. I referred to a previous encounter with Gary, who was part of the group, and asked for an officer to be sent. A sheriff's deputy arrived in about 15 minutes. I met him at the roadside and quickly laid out the situation, presenting the deed, proving ownership, the obvious warning signs, and the live footage from the trail camera on my phone, which showed Brenda and her group still defiantly standing on my land. The deputy, clearly knowledgeable about homeowners association disputes, explained that the law was very clear. He walked down the path and confronted the group, informing them that they were trespassing on private property. Brenda responded with a passionate speech about historical access and community rights. However, the deputy calmly but firmly interrupted her, clarifying the difference between permissive use and a legal easement, making it clear that the owner intended to press charges if they did not leave immediately. Confronted with the real threat of trespassing citations, the demonstration ended at once. Brenda and her group retreated back to HOA territory, carrying a mix of anger and embarrassment. The deputy recorded each person's name and issued formal warnings, making it clear that any further trespassing would lead to legal action. News of the sheriff's involvement spread rapidly through the area, making it unmistakably clear that the property owner was serious. The forest was strictly off-limits, and the new owner was serious about enforcing this rule. The internal dynamics of the HOA began to change significantly. Neighbors who had once supported Brenda, or at least tolerated her, were now furious with her. Their easy access to the woods, something they cherished, was gone, and they rightly saw Brenda's aggressive campaign against me as the cause. Through Mark, my supportive neighbor, I learned that the upcoming HOA board meeting was going to be intense. Residents demanded explanations from Brenda about why she had stirred up this conflict. Accusations were exchanged rapidly. Gary reportedly appeared embarrassed while Brenda struggled to justify her actions, placing all the blame on me for being unreasonable. Her backing on the board started to crumble. The HOA even had their attorney examine the case, likely costing them a significant sum, only to arrive at the same conclusion. The LLC owned the land outright. There were no easements involved, and enforcing the no trespassing rule was completely lawful. They had absolutely no options for recourse. My hunting continued uninterrupted, now taking place solely on land I jointly owned. I could roam miles into my forest, set up my deer stand, and enjoy the quiet and solitude without any fear of interference from the HOA. The threatening letters stopped, and the fines vanished from my account as if they had never existed. Brenda avoided making eye contact whenever we happened to cross paths, and the feeling of triumph was overwhelming. However, it was not merely a victory. It was serenity. The endless tension from the dispute, the endless bureaucratic struggles, all vanished, replaced by the gentle whisper of leaves in my own forest. Owning that land was no longer just about revenge. It became about finding peace, safeguarding a natural sanctuary, and drawing an unbreakable boundary against trivial oppression. The process demanded a great deal of money, time, and emotional strength. Yet, standing on a ridge overlooking thousands of acres of protected forest, knowing it was shielded from both developers and HOA Chirons, was absolutely worth it.